everyone. I hope you all are doing good. Today, as we all know that we have completed constitutional law and we have done almost all the important chapters of constitutional law, we will be talking about certain judicial doctrines and what basically are doctrines, what was decided in those doctrines, and how to use those doctrines in our questions. That is what we are going to do today. So let's just start. What are judicial doctrines? Judicial doctrines are nothing but these are the judgments or the principles which weren't a part of the initial constitution. Rather, they were added to the constitution through precedents or through judgments in various landmark case laws. तो case laws के आने के बाद जो सारे principles आए related to the constitution, we are going to discuss about all those judicial doctrines today. And ये जो आपका topic है, ये आपके लिए क्यों relevant है? Is because in the previous few papers I have already seen that legal reasoning में इन doctrines के बारे में बहुत ज़्यादा बात की हुई है. Now, whenever we have such doctrines, तो कुछ part of the judgment और कुछ part of the precedent is mentioned in the passage, and it becomes very difficult to understand the meaning of that passage. Why? Because first thing first, the language is such जो easily समझ नहीं आती. Secondly, the interpretation becomes varied. Right? तो वहाँ से questions जब बनते हैं, it becomes difficult for us to solve those questions. That is why I have taken up this topic wherein I will be discussing a few judicial doctrines with you guys in today's class. So let's just begin. So the first doctrine that we have already talked about quite a lot of time, but today also we will be discussing about this doctrine, which is the doctrine of basic structure. Now, what is the basic structure? Basic structure होता क्या है? Basic structure होता है the topics. I'll take it very easily, बहुत simply मैं आपको ये समझा रही हूँ. वो topics या फिर वो कुछ ऐसे concepts जो आप constitution से cannot be removed. Right? These are certain topics or certain concepts of the constitution which cannot be removed. Right? Now, there was a case law which was Keshav Nanda Bharti case of 1973, which is Keshav Nanda Bharti versus State of Kerala of 1973, wherein the leader of a mutt, right? Mutt is a religious institution, right? So now the Supreme Court in this case, wherein the leader of a mutt, he challenged Kerala's land laws, right? Land reforms, and that is what was challenged here. And इसमें constitution की validity कैसे question हुई थी? Because जो land reforms थे that were a state subject, ठीक है, and उस पे laws कौन बना रहा था? Center बना रहा था. Also the validity of whether a parliament, whether the parliament can make laws on certain matters or not, that was decided in this case. The question of whether parliament can decide such matters or not is what was said in this case. Now, in Keshav Nanda Bharti's case, the Supreme Court of India for the first time ruled that the parliament has the power, number one, to amend any part of the constitution, but it cannot alter the basic structure of the constitution. इसका simple सा मतलब ये है, most of the students have already asked me this question कि मैम अगर बेसिक स्ट्रक्चर को हम चेंज नहीं कर सकते तो राइट टू प्रॉपर्टी हमने राइट टू प्रॉपर्टी फंडामेंटल राइट से हटा के उसको कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल राइट कैसे बनाया? सी अर्लियर राइट टू प्रॉपर्टी यूज्ड टू बी इन आर्टिकल 19 clause F, right? And now it is in 300A article, and it specifically says that it is a constitutional right. Right? अब इसका क्या मतलब है? That a person whose property is in question cannot move the court saying कि ये तो मेरा fundamental right है to have the property. रादर ये कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल राइट है एंड इसलिए उसको प्रोटेक्शन मिल सकती है. आई होप दैट इज क्लियर नाउ. So it was reaffirmed by the Supreme Court in the Indira Nehru Gandhi versus Raj Narayan case. Now इस केस में सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने इनवैलिडेट कर दिया कि था किसको, a provision of the 39th Amendment Act of 1975 which kept the election dispute involving the Prime Minister and the Speaker of the Lok Sabha outside the jurisdiction of all the courts. यानी कि जो judicial review है, judicial review cannot take place in the matters which involved any sort of allegations regarding the elections of the Prime Minister. This is what was held, Prime Minister and the Speaker. This was something which was held in the Indira Nehru Gandhi versus Raj Narayan case. ठीक है. Now नेक्स्ट इज, अब इस केस में ये जो था ये इन क्वेश्चन था कि अगर ऐसा कोई भी डिस्प्यूट आता है रिगार्डिंग द जुडिशियल रिव्यू इन केस ऑफ एनी इलेक्शन ऑफ द प्राइम मिनिस्टर और द स्पीकर ऑफ द लोकसभा, तो वो जुडिशियल रिव्यू में नहीं होना चाहिए. जुडिशियल रिव्यू होता है जहाँ पे कोर्ट टेक्स द ओनर्स एंड कोर्ट्स टेक द मैटर इन हैंड, राइट, एंड दे डिसाइड वेदर इट वाज वैलिड और नॉट, कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल और नॉट, राइट. नाउ सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने ये डिसाइड करा कि कोई भी ऐसा प्रोविजन विच इज सेइंग कि भाई इलेक्शन डिस्प्यूट्स को आप बाहर रखो जुडिशियल रिव्यू से, दैट इज इनवैलिड. आई होप दैट इज क्लियर, राइट. नाउ द बेसिक स्ट्रक्चर डॉक्ट्रीन वाज रीअफर्म्ड इन द मनेरवा मिल्स केस आल्सो, right, and then in the Woman Rao case also. In this case, the Supreme Court examined the validity of Article 31A and Article 31B of the Indian Constitution with respect to the doctrine of basic structure. So ये बस brief से facts हैं, ये वो case laws हैं जिन्होंने strengthen करा the doctrine of basic structure. Now we come to the doctrine of separation of powers. What is separation of powers? Separation of powers का simple सा meaning होता है that the powers between the state, the center, the three organs of the government are different, right? They are all different and they are separated, and there are separate powers for the legislature, the judiciary, and the executive organ of the government. So this doctrine of separation of powers, it talks about the division of powers between various organs of the state, executive, legislature, and the judiciary, right? So also there was this scholar which I guess the name of which everybody knows, and the name of the scholar is Montesquieu, right? तो Montesquieu ने अपनी theory में कहा था separation of powers, and since then we have been following that theory, right? अब separation of powers signifies mainly three formulations of governmental process. Number one, the same person should not form a part of more than one of the three organs of the state government, of the state, not the state government but of the state, which means center or the state here. Now, one organ should not interfere with any other organ of the state. This is the second thing. And last thing, one organ should not exercise the functions assigned to any other organ, right? अब ये तीन चीजें हमें ध्यान में रखनी होती है जब भी हम बात करते होते हैं separation of powers की, right? Now, constitutional provision, that is Article 50 of the DPSP. Now, whenever I talk about DPSP, everybody knows कि मैम ये तो justiciable है ही नहीं, right? Now, Article 50 of the DPSP of the Indian Constitution separates the judiciary from the executive, as the state shall take steps to separate judiciary from the executive in the public services of the state, and except this, there is no formal and dogmatic division of powers, right? तो ये specific division of power है, and in any other case there is no such division of powers which is specifically given. Also there are certain provisions in the constitution जहाँ पे clearly separation of powers given है, right? Now, there were two judgments which we need to remember. First was Ramjoya versus the state of Punjab, wherein the Supreme Court held that Indian Constitution has not indeed recognized the doctrine of separation of powers in its absolute rigidity, but the functions of the different parts of the branches of the government have been sufficiently differentiated. अब सबसे पहली चीज जो सेपरेशन ऑफ पार्ट्स के बारे में हमें समझ आनी चाहिए वो ये है कि इंडिया में एब्सोल्यूट सेपरेशन ऑफ पार्ट्स नहीं है. Who is the head of the executive in India? The President of India. Who presides over joint sessions of the legislature? It is the President of India, right? तो legislature का part भी है President of India. Also, he is a part of executive. तो separation of parts कहाँ से हुआ? Moreover, we need to understand कि absolute का मतलब होता है जहाँ पे कोई exceptions ही ना हो. Indian Constitution में हमारे पास exceptions है to separation of parts. Hence, we have to understand कि इंडिया में absolute separation of parts नहीं है, right? But as the statement here clearly mentions कि बहुत हद तक हर किसी organ को पता है कि उनकी क्या duties है, right? Now, next we have Indira Nehru Gandhi versus Raj Narayan. In this case, the Supreme Court held that separation of parts is a part of the basic structure of the Constitution. None of the three separate organs of the Republic can take over the functions assigned to the other. So this has to be very clear कि जो functions एक organ को assigned है already by the Constitution, none of the other organs can overtake those functions. This is what separation of powers means. Now, let's just talk about the doctrine of pith and substance. Now, most of you might not have heard of this doctrine, but all those who have solved the previous year question papers, they might have seen something like this in the paper, because in one of the years this was discussed in the paper. Pith means true nature and substance means the most important or essential part of something, right? Now, the doctrine was first acknowledged in the Canadian Constitution. And in India, it came to be adopted in the pre-independence era in Government of India Act of 1935, right? So it was the Government of India Act of 1935 wherein we talked about something like this, right? Now, what is the applicability? We have to understand the applicability. Now, the doctrine of pith and substance is usually applied where the question arises of determining whether a particular law relates to the particular subject or not, mentioned in the 7th schedule. So for this we need to understand what is 7th schedule. 7th schedule talks about the lists, right? The lists that we have. So what kind of list do we have? We have the union list, the state list and the concurrent list, right? Apart from that, there is another list which is known as the residuary list. So the subjects which are given to each and every state, for example, if the subject is a part of the union list, only the central government will make laws on it. If it is a part of the state list, only state government will make laws on it. And if it is a part of the residuary list, then both can make laws on it, right? So here we have to understand that if a particular government is making laws on such a matter, whether that matter falls in their jurisdiction or not, right? So the doctrine of pith and substance is usually applied where the question arises of determining whether a particular law relates to a particular subject. Mentioned in 7th schedule, the court looks into the substance of the matter. Okay? It looks into the substance of the matter means that what is actually required and whether it is required or not, that is the substance of the matter. Now, apart from its applicability in cases related to the competency of the legislature, whether this law should have been made by this particular authority, whether this law might have been made by any other authority, तो ये सारी चीजें हमें pith and substance में ध्यान रखनी होती है. Article 246. Now, the doctrine of pith and substance is also applied in cases related to repugnancy in laws by the parliament and laws made by the state legislatures, according to Article 254. So, ये सारी applicability की बातें हैं of pith and substance. I hope that is clear. Now, moving ahead, the doctrine is employed in such cases to resolve the inconsistencies between laws made by the center and the state legislatures. And there is one important judgment with us, that is Prafulla versus the Bank of Commerce. The Supreme Court held that a state law dealing with money lending, which is a state subject, is not invalid merely because it incidentally affected promissory notes, which are the center subject, right? Because primarily what was their intention was to deal with the money lending, right? So here we have to understand the substance as to why the law was made. I hope this is clear. So this is what is doctrine of pith and substance. Now we'll move ahead to doctrine of incidental or ancillary power. Right? Now whenever we talk about the doctrine of incidental or ancillary power, we need to understand that when do we need to invoke this, कि कब use किया जाता है. So it is invoked when there is a need to aid the principal legislature in question. Principal legislation क्या होता है, ये भी नहीं पता. Let's see. So the doctrine of pith and substance deals only with subjects, but the doctrine of incidental and ancillary power deals with the power to legislate on such subjects and the matters connected thereto. ठीक है? Now, the evolution of this doctrine can be traced to R.V. Waterfield and a decision of the English Court of Appeal. Article 4 talks about power to make consequential changes in the law on matters supplemental and incidental to the law, providing altering the names of the states under Article 2 and 3. ठीक है? तो अब जो भी laws आगे हमें चेंज करने हैं ड्यू टू द चेंज इन द सब्सटेंस ऑफ द मैटर, उसके लिए हम ये यूज करते हैं, राइट? नाउ हाँ, आर्टिकल 169. Article 169, it talks about the power given to the parliament on abolition or creation of legislative councils in states as may be necessary to give effect to the provisions of the law and may also contain such supplemental, incidental and consequential provisions as parliament may deem necessary. ठीक है? तो अब लेट्स से एक लॉ हमने अमेंड कर दिया या चेंज कर दिया, उससे रिलेटेड या उसके जो सप्लीमेंटल लॉज है उनमें भी चेंजेस करने पड़ेंगे. कौन वो चेंजेस करेगा, कैसे वो चेंजेस होंगे? दिस इज द डॉक्ट्रीन व्हिच डील्स विद इट. I hope that is clear. Have a quick look at it. Done? Chalo. So now there is an important judgment of Rajasthan versus G. Chawla. In this case, what happened was that the power to legislate on a topic of legislation carries with it the power to legislate on ancillary matter which can be said to be reasonably included in the power given. ठीक है? तो अगर let's say किसी भी state ने कोई law pass किया, let's say the state has passed a law on reduction of loudspeakers or reduction in the distribution of loudspeakers या loudspeakers की distribution पे कोई भी law बना है, right? And that is not necessarily under the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court, or let's say that is not necessarily under the jurisdiction of the state. Here what can happen is that as per the change made by the center in that law, ठीक है, अगर सेंटर ने वो लॉ में कोई चेंजेस करे हैं तो वो और रिलेटेड लॉज में भी चेंजेस कर सकते हैं. दिस इज व्हाट हैड बीन सेड इन दिस केस, राइट? नाउ next is doctrine of severability. Now what do we mean by doctrine of severability? Severability का मतलब होता है अलग करना, ठीक है? Now as per clause 1 of article 13 of the constitution, if any of the laws in force in India is inconsistent with the provisions of the fundamental rights, they shall to the extent of that inconsistency be void. What is important for us is to the extent, कि जिस हद तक वो लॉ अगेंस्ट है द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन या जिस हद तक वो प्रोविजन अगेंस्ट है द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन, इट कैन बी सिवियर्ड, राइट? और इट कैन बी डिक्लेयर्ड एज वॉइड. फॉर एग्जाम्पल लेट्स से एक लॉ है जिसमें दो पार्ट्स हैं. द फर्स्ट पार्ट इज अगेंस्ट द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन और इज अल्ट्रा वायरस, बट द सेकेंड हाफ ऑफ द सेम एक्ट इट गोज विद द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन. तो क्या हम पूरे लॉ को ही इनवैलिड या फिर वॉइड डिक्लेयर कर देंगे? नहीं, हम फर्स्ट पार्ट को हटा देंगे और सेकेंड पार्ट को एज इट इज रख लेंगे. सो हियर the whole law or the act would not be held invalid, but only the provisions which are not in consistency with the fundamental rights will be held invalid. So limitation here, if the valid and the invalid part are so closely mixed up with each other that it cannot be separated, then the whole law or act will be held invalid. Secondly, the doctrine of severability finds its roots in England in the case of Nordenfelt versus the Maxim Nordenfelt Guns and Ammunitions Company Limited, where the issue was related to a trade clause. ठीक है, तो उस clause में से whatever was ultra wise was deleted and whatever was valid was kept, right? Now, there is an Indian case law which is A.K. Gopalan versus the state of Madras. The Supreme Court held that in case of inconsistency of constitution, only the disputed provision of the act will be void and not the whole of it. And every attempt should be made to save as much as possible of the act. Right? I hope this is clear. Now moving on to the next one, which is State of Bombay versus F.N. Balsara. In this case, 8 sections of the Bombay Prohibition Act were declared invalid. The Supreme Court said that the portion which was invalid to the extent of fundamental rights was separable from the rest of the act, and hence they can be severed. Right? Next is doctrine of ellipse. Now what do we mean by doctrine of eclipse? This is something that we need to understand, but for that let's just read the important judgment. So it was first introduced in the case of Bhikaji Narayan Dhakras versus the state of Madhya Pradesh. Right? So it was held in this case, wherein the central provision and Berar Motor Vehicles Act of 1947 empowered the provincial government to take up the entire provincial motor transport business. These are violative of Article 19(1)(g). Right? So here the Supreme Court held that the impugned law became for the time being eclipsed by the fundamental right. Now what do we mean by eclipse? Eclipse means overshadowing. Right? So let's see here. It applies when a law or act violates the fundamental rights, first thing first. In such a case, the fundamental rights overshadow the law and make it unenforceable but not void. तो यहाँ पे आपको ध्यान में रखना है, severability के केस में वो void हो जाते हैं, but in this case they are just overshadowed, that is they are unenforceable, right? Having no legal effect from the inception means void ab initio. So here they are not void ab initio, rather they are eclipsed, that is they won't be taken to the court. So here they can be reinforced, very important, if the restrictions posed by the fundamental rights are removed. It is only against the citizens that these laws or act remains in a dormant condition but remain in operation as against non-citizens who are not entitled to fundamental rights. Doctrine of eclipse is contained in Article 13 clause 1 of the Indian Constitution. The doctrine of eclipse does not apply to post-constitutional laws. I hope that is clear कि जहाँ पे fundamental rights आपके कोई भी law को overshadow कर देते हैं या for the time being they cannot be enforced due to the application of fundamental rights, that is known as doctrine of eclipse. Right? Next we have is doctrine of territorial nexus. So it says that laws made by a state legislature are not applicable outside the state except when there is a sufficient nexus between the state and the object. ठीक है? अब let's say there is a river dispute and कोई laws हैं जो उस river से related हैं and वो जो river है वो दूसरी state में भी जाती है and there is a fair case कि हमें वही same laws उस river की extent तक apply करने चाहिए या उस end तक भी apply करने चाहिए for the laws to function perfectly. तो वहाँ पे हम ये doctrine use कर सकते हैं. For example, Article 245 Clause 2 provides that no law made by the Parliament would be invalid on the ground that it would have extraterritorial operation. That is, it takes effect outside the territories of India. Right? Next, in a case of A.H. Wadia versus the Income Tax Commissioner, it was held that a question of extraterritoriality of enactment can never be raised against supreme legislative authority on the ground of questioning its validity. एक और केस था जिसका नाम था State of Bombay versus RMDC. The Supreme Court held that there existed a sufficient territorial nexus to enable the Bombay legislature to tax the respondent as all the activities which the competitors is ordinarily expected to undertake took place mostly within Bombay. Right? Now, next we have, तो ये clear हो गया सबको कि just because जो law है उसकी applicability outside India है या फिर उसकी applicability outside India या फिर outside the territory of a particular state. Let's not take India in that case. Let's take outside a particular state होगी तो उसको हम invalid नहीं यहाँ पे consider करेंगे and that can be taken to the court. Right? Next. डॉक्ट्रिन ऑफ कलरेबल लेजिस्लेशन. कलरेबल लेजिस्लेशन का मतलब होता है कि आप कोई भी काम इस तरीके से नहीं करोगे, कोई भी काम जो आप नहीं कर सकते उसको आप कलर्ड लेजिस्लेशन का मतलब जस्ट बाय चेंजिंग द मीन्स आप उस काम को नहीं करके दोगे. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, let's just see the examples also here. So by applying this principle, the fate of the impugned legislation is decided, and this doctrine is also called fraud on the constitution. The doctrine of colorable legislation comes into play when a legislature cannot possess the power to make laws upon a particular subject, but nonetheless indirectly makes one. ठीक है, indirectly makes one. Now let's say that the center does not have the right to, this is just an example, let's say the center does not have the right to make any laws regarding the religious practice of a person. ठीक है, ये एक example है. Let's say the center has no rights to make any laws regarding the religious practices of a person, but center comes up with the laws which is regarding the fundamental right. We know that fundamental rights the center can legislate upon it, and through that it counters this law. ठीक है, by making such a law it is countering this particular subject which is not a center's or a state subject, right, union subject. तो इसको हम बोलेंगे colorable legislation. ठीक है, तो अब ये डॉक्ट्रिन जो होता है इसका ओरिजिन है in the maxiom, whatever legislature cannot do directly, it cannot do indirectly as well, right? So the doctrine is usually applied to Article 246, which has demarcated the legislative competence of the parliament and the state legislative assemblies by outlining the different subjects under union list, state list and the concurrent list. I hope this is clear to everyone. कि जो काम आप डायरेक्टली नहीं कर सकते वही काम आप इनडायरेक्टली भी नहीं कर सकते हो, which is clear here. Now, the limitations here. The doctrine has no application, very important, where the power of a legislature are not fettered by any constitutional limitations. ठीक है? Next, it is also not applicable to subordinate legislation. Now, important judgments here are R.S. Joshi versus Ajit Mills. So the Supreme Court observed that in the statute of force, the colorable exercise of or extortion on administrative force or misrepresentation on the constitution are articulation which only imply that assembly is clumsy to authorize a specific law, albeit the mark of competency is stuck on it and afterwards it is colorable enactment. Right? So the same thing was held in this case law as well. Next is doctrine of pleasure. इसके बारे में बहुत लोगों ने सुना होगा doctrine of pleasure. Now what is it? The doctrine of pleasure has its origin in the English law as per which a civil servant holds office during the pleasure of the crown. That is, जब तक सरकार है तब तक आपकी नौकरी है, in simple words. That is what is doctrine of pleasure. So under Article 155, the governor of a state is appointed by the president and holds the office during the pleasure of the president. Article 310, the civil servants, that is the members of the defense services, civil services, all India services, or a person holding military post or civil post under the center state has office at the pleasure of the president or the governor as the case may be. ठीक है? Next, Article 311, it places the restrictions on this doctrine and provides safeguards to civil servants against any arbitrary dismissal from the post. Right? Dismissal from the post. Next. Next we have is important judgment, which is State of Bihar versus Abdul Majid. And in this case, it was held that the English common law has not been adopted in its entirety and with all its rigorous implications. In Union of India versus Tulsi Ram Patel, the Supreme Court held that pleasure doctrine was neither a relic of the feudal age nor it was based on any special prerogative of the British Crown, but was based upon public policy only. Right? I hope that is clear. Now, next is harmonious construction. Now, what do we mean by harmonious construction? So, the term harmonious construction refers to such construction by which harmony of oneness amongst various provisions of an enactment is arrived. ठीक है, जहां पे हमें different provisions को एक साथ लेके चलना है या उनमें balance बना के चलना है, उसको हम बोलते हैं harmonious construction. Right? So, when the words of statutory provision bear more than one meaning, ठीक है, जब भी laws में एक से ज़्यादा मतलब निकल के आ रहा है and there is a doubt as to which meaning should prevail, their interpretation should be in a way that each has a separate effect and neither is redundant or nullified. कि सब provisions को equal weightage मिले और उनमें एक balance हो, right? So the doctrine of harmonious construction originated through interpretation given by the courts in a number of cases. The evolution of doctrine can be traced back to the very first amendment of India made during that time in the judgment of Shankari Prasad versus Union of India. Right? Now, these are the principles for rule of harmonious construction. In the landmark case law of CIT versus Hindustan Bulk Carriers of 2003, the Supreme Court laid down the 5 principles of rule of harmonious construction. And what were these 5 rules? Number 1, the court must avoid a head-on clash of seemingly contradicting provisions and they must constitute the contradictory provisions. Next, the provisions of one section cannot be used to defeat the provisions contained in another unless the court, despite of all its efforts, is unable to find a way to reconcile their differences. So it is the duty of the court to reconcile the differences. कोर्ट को देखना है कि उसको दोनों provisions को कैसे साथ में लेके चलने हैं, कैसे एक balance बनाना है. When it is impossible to completely reconcile the differences in the contradictory provisions, the court must interpret them in such a way so that effect is given to both the provisions as much as possible. Courts must also keep in mind the interpretation that reduces one provision to useless number or death is not harmonious construction. ठीक है? Next. To harmonize is not to destroy any statutory provision or to render it fruitless. अब एक important judgment थी यहाँ पे जिसका नाम था Re Kerala Education Bill 1951, and it was held that in deciding the fundamental rights, the court must consider the directive principles and adopt the principle of harmonious construction. यानी कि जब हम बात कर रहे हैं दो provisions की जो equally important है, जैसे कि फंडामेंटल राइट्स और DPSP दोनों इंपॉर्टेंट है, तो यहाँ पे द कोर्ट हैज टू डिसाइड इन सच अ मैनर कि दोनों में से किसी की भी वैल्यू कम ना हो. दूसरा, इट हैज टू प्रैक्टिस बोथ इन अ बैलेंस्ड मैनर. ऑल्सो अगर नहीं हो पा रहा है ऐसा कुछ, देन इट हैज टू सी कि दूसरा जो पार्ट है, लेट्स से अगर हम फंडामेंटल राइट्स को अपहेल्ड कर रहे हैं तो वी हैव टू मेक श्योर कि DPSPs जो है वो बिल्कुल ही रिप्यूडिएट ना हो जाए. राइट नाउ, this is what was decided in Re Kerala Education Bill as well. So I believe all these principles are quite clear to you. If you have any doubts in any of these principles or anything else, you can always comment down in the comment section below and I'll be glad to help you guys out. Thank you.